Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on the worm bins that we've been referring to as my odd couple pair of bins for a few check-ins now. And the reason I gave them that unusual name of the odd couple is because of the large gap in their ages. So one of the bins is actually at the present time my oldest active bin at 350 days of age, the one that's directly behind me, and the one that it was matched up with to be its odd couple pair is the one that you see right over here, 60 days younger. And last time we checked in on them, they were given their 30th and their 24th feedings. Today, at 350 and 290 days of age, I don't even really plan on feeding. I thought we would just check in to see how they're coming along, perhaps till up the material to see if we can assist with the drying a little bit. We would like to try to screen the material in these systems and separate the worms from their castings using the screening method. And in order for that to be successful, the material does need to be pretty loose flowing and non-clumpy, meaning that it has to be a little bit dry. Things in the older system looked like they might be ready for that already, but in the younger system things were quite a bit damp still. So we've been allowing both systems a little bit more time to dry. So I'm going to grab a glove, here we go, and we're going to get the systems up on the bench. We're going to see how they're coming along. So let's get to work. You may have noticed that pair of stacked up bins that were between these two. Oops. All right. Over on the shelf, those two systems, when we last checked in on them, were left with no coverings, no cardboard, no paper, no plastic, no nothing, just completely exposed to the air. And the whole idea there too was to let those systems dry, but in those systems I think we had a considerably greater quantity of moisture that needed to dry. Now, what we added out here on the surface was our worm chow last time. And rather than worms coming up to eat the stuff, it seems like the stuff just sort of sat there idle and got moldy. Interesting. Not quite what I expected to see. So I suppose one thing we're going to have to do is blend this stuff in a little bit to give it a chance to finally get broken down by the worms. And I don't think the worms are going to mind, because worms do tend to like eating mold and fungi. And I suppose I should probably be careful because I'm touching the stuff and I could already see that's the thing with mold and stuff like that. It reproduces by getting airborne. The spores get from place to place by getting up into the air and getting caught in the wind and getting moved around that way. So I'm thinking the first best thing we could probably do here is just try to combine this stuff with some of the surrounding castings material, and at the same time I could already feel that we're dampening it, and then we don't have to worry too much about getting that stuff airborne and possibly breathing it in or anything like that. I mean, I doubt that it's the sort of mold that would cause a person any harm, so I'm not really concerned about it from that point of view. But I just like the idea of getting it down into the material, because in the end that would have been the deal anyway, is just to blend it all in, to try to help it get broken down. But at least this way we can ensure that it's all getting blended in nicely and spread around. There was a whole lot more of it over here in the older system. There's a little bit of it here too, but not quite as much. So we had the thicker 2-ply cardboard over here in the older system because we felt like it didn't really... We didn't really feel like we needed to protect the material in this system so much. Well, not protect it per se, but we didn't feel like we needed to aid in the drying so much, because the material in the older system felt like it was a little bit more loose and crumbly and free-flowing, more so than the material here in the younger system. So we opted to take the thinner top covering cardboard and put that over there How did it go? Geez, I'm getting a little confused here now. I'm sorry. We had originally had the thicker sheet on here, but since we felt like things were drier over here, we moved the thicker one over here, feeling like we didn't need to promote drying quite as much over here, and we moved the thinner cardboard and smaller cardboard over to the younger system in the hopes that perhaps it would permit a little bit more drying of the material over here. But I am starting to get the sense that perhaps the next best step here would be to simply leave off the cardboard. Maybe we could still stick with the paper coverings, or we could just leave everything off. I mean, leaving the paper coverings on are not going to result in protecting the system from drying much. Perhaps we can just return the newspaper top coverings and just leave off the cardboard. And you know, every time I look through this material and I start seeing all these little chunks of leaf stems, it almost makes me wonder if we're getting into this prematurely. Like perhaps the real best bet here would be to actually cover up with plastic so as to really hold in the existing moisture content so that the worms can really continue whittling down any of this sort of remaining material. More so here in the younger system, as I recall. I mean, I do see some of it in here too. Little bits of leaf stems over here in the older system. But as I recall, the material here in the older system seemed to have less of that in here. And I think we're even seeing little bits of some of the foods that they received not too long ago. Or is this some of that weird plasticky material? I do remember bumping into some of this weird stretchy plasticky material, and that might be that, so I'm just pulling it out because it might not be the sort of stuff that would even compost down. So I'm trying to formulate a plan here in my mind. You know, I'm caught a little bit off guard right from the start. I was caught off guard by the way we had mold on the top surface, rather than a bunch of castings left behind from the worms coming up to eat all the worm chow. The worm chow just sort of, you know, started to feed the mold in the system, and then that was the only stuff that was able to really maintain a good foothold. Perhaps there just wasn't quite enough moisture out here on the surface for the worms to be able to cruise around and be productive, so they would just dive down lower where things are a little bit more damp, somewhat ignoring the foods that we had left out on the surface for them. I guess in hindsight, perhaps the better bet would have been to try to blend in their foods down into the material so that they could make some use out of it. But at this point, it doesn't matter so much. Now it's a combination of whatever remained of the food as well as the mold that had established itself on the foods. And now it's all blended in both systems. And it does seem to me like a little bit more drying in both systems is going to be necessary before we can consider running this material through my screen. What I've got is a 1/4-inch screen, but I could certainly imagine little chunks of this material getting caught in the screen. And a lot of times when I find a chunk that's a little bit bigger like this, I assume that it's not just a bunch of castings all stuck together. I do assume that there's some sort of a chunk of material down within the little ball of material. Here in this case, it does seem like this was just overly damp castings actually sticking to one another to make that little ball. But in some cases there is a little object within, and I think that until things dry off a little bit more, those little balls are not going to be able to crumble apart. They're just going to remain as large chunks and not make a whole lot of progress. And there's all kinds of other stuff in here too, you know. I'm really starting to question whether or not we're really ready for screening this material and harvesting the castings and moving the worms on. It does in a way seem to me like the material in these systems still has a way to go. And it's so weird. Once in a while I bump into an object. I removed one earlier too that was just so hard that I was unable to crush it or break it or do anything with it. And it makes me wonder what it is. What kind of material is this that it just doesn't want to give whatsoever? It's not soft, it's not brittle, it won't chip, it won't crush, it won't break. I mean, that's pretty much all it takes for me to decide it's probably not a material that belongs in the worm bin. Whatever it is, it probably got in there by mistake somehow. So, decisions. Here too, some sort of weird material. It's awfully tough. Does not seem like it wants to give. Extremely hard. Won't even break. Hear it. What on earth are we dealing with here? I've definitely got some weird stuff going on in these two systems. I don't know why, but it just seems to me like maybe we went down the road of trying to gear these systems up for harvest and migrating the worms a little bit prematurely. Although, you got to admit, there is a lot of really beautiful castings material throughout both systems. And then I start to swing the other direction. I start to think to myself, you know, perhaps enough of it would pass through the screen that we would have ourselves a nice little partial harvest of the material in here, stuff that has actually broken down to become worm castings and is small enough and crumbly enough to pass through my screen. And then if there's still material that's not quite there yet, then so be it. Maybe it's just stuff that would accompany the worms into their new home, and then we could really bring these systems to a close and not let unusual stuff like large chunks of leftover food or weird hard objects that don't want to break or leaf stems or anything like that. We wouldn't allow any of those things to come in our way. We would just press on with, you know, harvesting whatever castings we can, moving the worms off to a new home, and then possibly just reflecting on what we did good and what we did not so good in a system like this to get sort of a weird outcome rather than a bunch of really nice loose flowing material that could easily be harvested. So whatever, I guess this really just ended up being me coming down here to see how things are and to sort of think out loud and kind of walk through and talk through some of my thought processes with you. But I believe that what we're going to do is we're going to leave off the cardboard. We will bring back these paper coverings, which are going to allow for a good bit of the system's moisture to continue to escape, allowing the systems to dry off a little bit more. And then, who knows, maybe I will simply break out my screen and run all this material through it. We'll get what we get. We'll have a whole bunch of really beautiful castings, but we will also at the same time be left with a bunch of stuff that's, still going to be in need of a little bit more work by the worms, and that could just go with the worms into their new home. So let's leave it at that. I guess this glove doesn't need to be rinsed off. It's kind of broken at this point. It's not that bad though. Perhaps I could just get one more use out of it, even though it doesn't have the little cuff on it anymore. Whatever. Alright everyone, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.